All right, 1 and 2. This is Sandy Reese. Welcome, everybody. It is January 29th, and we are here for a webinar that is sponsored by WNC Nonprofit Pathways. I am so excited to be here on behalf of Nonprofit Pathways to provide you with some training, with some insights to get your thinking. And so I think all of us want to thank Nonprofit Pathways for making this possible and providing this training for you. So yay, thank you, Cindy, and to everybody at Nonprofit Pathways. We're going to be talking today about how to make your fundraising outrageously successful. If you have not grabbed the handouts, I believe there's a place in the GoToWebinar, I call it a dashboard. It's that little thing over on the right side of your screen, and you'll have a place where you can download that PDF. And that PDF actually has a couple of more pages in it than the one that we emailed out earlier today, so you may want to make sure you grab that one. Those extra pages I think you're going to really like. They're just going to make your life easier. So we are talking about fundraising. That's everybody's favorite, right? That's certainly my favorite. All right, let's see here. So again, we want to acknowledge Nonprofit Pathways for making this possible. If you have questions for Nonprofit Pathways, if you need some support, I encourage you to get in touch with them. And I've included their email and the website on there. They provide a lot of different training, coaching, support kinds of activities. You definitely want to take advantage of it, and it's specifically for Western North Carolina. So definitely look into that if you need them. All right, let's see here. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm trying to watch the Q&A and make sure everybody's on board and everything's working. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about me. I think some of you have probably heard me speak before, maybe some of you are reading my blog, but I thought before we jump too far in there, I want to tell you a little bit about me. I am over just on the other side of the mountains in East Tennessee. I am a coach and consultant. I do a lot of presentations. I'm going to give you a little more of my story in just a minute. I thought it might be fun to define why I chose to use the word outrageous in the name of the webinar today. It is 3 keys to outrageous success, or 3 keys to making this an outrageously successful year. Well, why did I decide to use outrageous? Well, if you look at the definition, outrageous means, among many things, highly unusual or unconventional, extravagant, and remarkable. What would it look like if you had highly unusual or unconventional fundraising this year? What would it look like if you had extravagant or remarkable fundraising? What could you do? What would be possible for your organization? Well, that's how we roll at Get Fully Funded. We like to think big. I believe that if we're going to go to all the effort to raise money, let's raise all the money you need to fully fund your organization. So that's why we're all about outrageous success. I want you to play big. One of the things that I have learned over time is that nobody gives big gifts to mediocre organizations, mediocre vision, mediocre programs. So when you're really stretching and going for something big, you might hit it, and even if you don't, you get really close to it, you're still going to have crazy success, which is really awesome. Here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to give you some reasons and some insight into why you may not be bringing in the money you need now and how to fix it. I talk to a lot of organizations who are just falling a little bit short of their goals and they're frustrated. So I want to give you some insight into why that might be happening and help you fix that. I'm going to give you my 3-part formula for successful annual fundraising. And I think you're going to really like this. I'm going to make it really simple for you. And then I'm going to share my 1-10-1000 rule. I've shared that with a lot of people and they really like it. And I think you'll enjoy it too. What I really want to do today is make you think. If I can challenge your thinking, if I can inspire you, if I can get you thinking about something in a new way, then I'm going to be really happy with that. Because the truth is, you might be able to continue raising the same old money that you always have, and that's okay if you're good with that. If you're comfortable with status quo, then keep doing that. If you want to do something bigger, if you want to raise more money, then you've got to think about it differently. You've got to do something different. And that's what I really want to inspire you to do. I do want to do a couple of bits of housekeeping before we jump too far in. I do have handouts. If you've just joined in, you should have a link on your GoToWebinar dashboard where you can download those handouts. And just so everybody knows, I am recording today, and I'll be sending out a link to the recording. If you have questions, go ahead and type those in the chat box as we go. I'm going to be stopping in a couple of places during the presentation to check for questions. And if I can answer those as we go, I'm going to do that. But I've definitely got some time built in at the end to do some Q&A so that you can have a chance to ask questions, have a chance to get something cleared up. So just so you know, that's how this is going to roll. All right, so hopefully everybody's ready, and we will move right on in. I've been working in nonprofits since the late 90s, so coming up on 20 years, which is kind of weird because I don't think of myself as being that old. But here's what I want you to know about that. I did not go to school to study fundraising. In fact, I wasn't born knowing anything about fundraising. I was a regular little kid. You know, the first thing that I wanted to be when I started thinking about what I wanted to be, I wanted to dig up dinosaur bones. How funny is that? And my older brother told me that by the time I was an adult, there wouldn't be any more dinosaur bones to dig up, and so I let that go. And now I'm like so mad at him because I really could have done that, and it would have been fun. But I sure did not have on my radar that I want to be a fundraiser when I grow up. I don't remember signing up for it at career day. It just was not something that I thought I wanted to get into. What did happen to me is I was working in marketing in Knoxville, Tennessee, and went for a tour at the local rescue mission. And I was really impressed with what I saw. I was interested. I was asking questions, and before long, they invited me to join their board, which I did. And a year later, they had a position come open in their resource development office, and I looked at it and said, that looks like marketing to me. And so we talked about it, and they said, why don't you come join our staff? So I resigned from the board, joined the staff, and I've never looked back. It's been a lot of fun. I was there for about a year and then moved on to Second Harvest Food Bank, and I'm going to tell you that story in just a second. In 2005, I became a little restless. I was ready to do something else, and so that's when I started Get Fully Funded. So the company is about 10 years old, and in 10 years, we have helped hundreds of small organizations learn to raise big money and inspire their donors and make a bigger impact in the world. So that's what it's all about. I'm going to tell you several stories today from my experience at the food bank. Here's what you need to know. I showed up at Second Harvest Food Bank. I didn't know anything about fundraising, really. Even though I'd worked at the rescue mission for a year, I did volunteers, special events, and ran the thrift store. So I didn't really know anything about cultivating donors. I didn't really know anything about running a development office. So I had to figure a lot of it out the hard way. And really what I figured out was there are things that work and things that don't work. I spent the first year just figuring it all out. The second year I made a lot of mistakes. I threw a lot of spaghetti at the wall. Year 3, I started to really figure it out. I started to really get some traction. In that whole time I was learning. Of course, we didn't have webinars back then. I was going to conferences, I was reading books, I was working with a mentor, and I started to learn some things that worked. And that's part of what I'm going to teach you today is how to shortcut that whole process and really dig into changing lives and building success in fundraising. So one of the first things I want you to do, if you'll grab your handout, on page 1, right at the top, it says, my definition of success. I would love for you to just jot down, what would successful fundraising look like for you at your organization? What would successful fundraising look like? And just write that down on your handout. And if you want to share that in the chat box, you certainly are welcome to. All right, the other thing that I want you to think about as we move in through fundraising is what fundraising really is and isn't. I'm going to talk about that just a little more in a minute. But I think it's just really important to get that definition of success nailed down. What does that look like? Successful fundraising for you may look like being able to fully meet your budget and make sure that there's no waiting list. Maybe success looks like starting a new program or growing a program. it's really important to know what that's going to look like before you jump in, because otherwise it's easy to just blaze a trail, try to raise money, and it's almost like flailing around. You don't really know where you're trying to get to. Heather, I love yours. Heather says consistent process or plan for raising money, fully funded programs so I don't have to worry. Boom. I love that. Love that. I'm right with you. That's also how I think about things. It ought to be fully funded and you oughtn't to have to worry about stuff. All right, so once you get your definition of success nailed down, the next thing that I want you to think about is how your nonprofit changes lives. If we're going to build sustainable funding, it's got to be all about donors, and that's what donors are interested in, is how your organization is changing lives. What I think is when you raise all the money that you need, you can change more lives. It's just a piece of truth. So on your handout, why don't you jot down how your nonprofit changes lives? And if you can do it in just a few words, that's perfect. If it takes you 15 minutes to write down a giant paragraph, we got some work to do. How's your organization changing lives? So for Habitat for Humanity, you are moving people out of substandard housing into a home of their own so that they can be very proud. It often has all kinds of side effects, like children usually do better in school. People, when they feel better about themselves, usually are more successful in life. It's an amazing kind of thing. That is going to be important as we go. You need to be really in touch with how your nonprofit changes lives, because as we start talking about how to inspire donors, you need to have that information handy and ready to go. Amy says she's in their organization empowering girls to be their best selves. I love that. Love that. All right. So I do want to address one thing before we go too far. And I've run across this a lot, of what people think fundraising is and what it isn't. Now, you guys are the smart ones because you're here. People who are not here see fundraising a little differently. We know that fundraising is a partnership with donors, and donors like to be part of that partnership. It's transformational for both the donor and the nonprofit. If you ever talk to somebody who's made a really large gift, they feel differently about themselves and about the organization and about life in general. Good fundraising facilitates life-changing services. That's what it is. It's really about connecting people in the community who are compassionate and caring and their resources with organizations that are doing the work on the ground. That's really what fundraising is about. It's not begging. It's not selling stuff. It's not hitting people up. Oh my gosh, I hear this all the time. Well, we'll just go hit up old, Bob Jones. And I say, we don't hit anybody. Fundraising is not a contact sport. Honestly, what all of this is mindset. Normally, if somebody thinks that they're begging, if they don't like fundraising, they see it as kind of yicky, they've got some negative mindset going about what fundraising is. So by the way, if you've got board members that don't want anything to do with fundraising, they've probably got some negative mindset. So just know that. And I'm going to give you some hints about that as we go, about how to overcome some of that if that's something that you're dealing with. But you really do want to watch that. Now, a lot of people do fundraising by default. And what I mean by that is they do what they've always done instead of really looking around to see what they need to be doing. How many of you have events that you do because you always have, or things that happen at your organization that nobody questions because you've been doing them for 20 years and that's just the way it is? That's a real dangerous place to be. Usually we do fundraising by default because we get too comfortable. We are not stopping long enough to think about what we should be doing, and we just keep going with status quo, and it doesn't serve you. So I want to just put this thought into your head that if you're in your comfort zone, if you're doing things because you always have, it may be time to shake that up a little. It may be time to think about how you can do fundraising a little differently. When I got to the food bank, certainly there were things that have been going on for a really long time, and it was easy for me as an outside person to look at some of that and say, why are we doing that? It doesn't make any sense. We're not generating enough revenue off of that event to even cover all our staff time. Why are we doing that? So that's what I want you to do. I want you to challenge the status quo. I want you to think about some of this stuff, because you're not going to create outrageous success if you're fundraising by default. If you're stuck in a rut, if you're dealing with the status quo, you're not going to be outrageously successful. If you look around in your community, there probably is an organization or two that just seem to have the Midas touch. Everything they do seems to work. Well, they're probably always asking themselves, how can we do this better? That's what I have found over the years is the organizations that really seem to be moving and shaking, they're challenging the status quo, which is very cool in my opinion. All right, let's go right, now that I've kind of got your head in the space of, well, maybe we need to think about this differently. Let's go right to this 3-part formula for success. All right, here we go. The 3-part formula, and you can fill this in. You've got this, this tricircle diagram on your handout, so you can fill this in. It's about getting in front of the right people at the right time with the right message. Right people, right time, right message. So you can go back to what you know about fundraising and say, does that fit? What about if we're sending a letter through the mail? Well, we're targeting the right people at the right time, and we're putting the right thing in the letter. So that works. How about a grant? Well, that's about getting in front of the right people, in other words, the right foundation, at the right time, in other words, by the deadline, and putting the right message or the right information into the proposal or application or letter of intent. So it works there too. You'll find that this works in all kinds of places. So if we boil it all down to this, then that other stuff is strategy. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But right now, I want you to get that good fundraising is about getting in front of the right people at the right time with the right message. And when you do that, you will raise money. One of the reasons that you may not be raising the kind of money that you need is either you're targeting the wrong people, or you're doing it at a time that doesn't work for them, or you're sharing information that's boring them instead of inspiring them. So what I want to do is dig into each one of these and give you some insight in how to do it really well, and also some practical tips on how this is going to play out when you go put it into action. So let's talk about the right people. Who are the right people? You know, first of all, you have to understand that not everybody in your community is going to give to your organization. They just don't. Good Fundraising 101 tells us that not everybody in a community gives, and of the people who do give, most everybody has their favorite organizations or their favorite causes. And people tend to not change too much around their favorite causes. Honestly, people give to anywhere between 3 and 5 organizations at the same time. So what we have to look at is, who exactly do we need to target? So imagine that this grid, if you can see the slide, there's, let's see, there's probably about 30 people on this grid. They're all a little different. They're all very excited. They're all giving us a thumbs up. They think fundraising is cool. Which one of these people, or which ones, represent your best donors? Is it the guy in the bottom row with the red tie? Or is it the doctor a couple of lines up from him? Is it the lady in the top left corner? Don't know. Is it the guy with the Santa hat? See, when you go out to the general community to try to raise money, it's the same as trying to reach out to all these people. You don't really know anything about them, do you? You don't really know what they're interested in, what they care about, whether or not they give to charity, who their favorites already are. So trying to approach your entire community doesn't work. Here's another thing that doesn't work. Going after quote-unquote rich people. So let me ask you, of these people on this grid, tell me which ones are the rich ones. Yeah, you don't really know, do you? It's hard to know because you can't always tell just from looking at somebody whether or not they have income that they could share with you. So if you've been going after the quote rich people, stop. Just because they have money doesn't mean they're going to give it to you. It doesn't mean that they give to any charity. It's much better to go after people who care about your organization. So let's say we find out that the lady at the end of the first line is in love with your organization. She loves what you do. I'd say chances are good that she's going to find a way to help. If she can make a donation, she probably will. If not, she may make a great board member. She might be the best volunteer you ever had, or she may be good friends with somebody who could be amazingly helpful to you. So we got to get closer into finding the right people. Here's some things that are going to get in your way of finding the right people. The first is the passion myth. I see this a lot, where people who are incredibly passionate about their organization think that everybody else will be too. And so they just go out to the whole community and they ask for people to support their organization, and then they don't understand why everybody doesn't give. This is a great organization. They should give to us. Everybody should, but they don't. I'll tell you, even when I worked at the food bank, I mean, that's a pretty widespread, widely accepted, widely supported cause, and I found people who didn't give and didn't want to. It wasn't their thing. It's okay. So that goes right into broad appeal. Not everybody is going to care, and you can't go with a shotgun approach and think that you're going to spray and pray your way into some donations. It doesn't work. You got to target in on those people who do care about what you're doing. Another thing that gets in the way of finding the right people is inconsistent outreach. When you are looking for new donors every now and again, you're going to have a harder time finding them. When you really get focused on finding new donors, and you need to be all the time, it's almost like it starts to gain momentum and it gets easier to find them and you get better at looking for them. If you haven't heard about donor retention, that's a way of measuring how many donors you're keeping from one year to the next. And across the board right now, retention numbers are in the toilet. They're awful. And it's running nationally at about 35%, which means if you start the year with 100 donors, you're only going to keep about 35 of them. You're going to lose 65 people because they're going to either move away, they're going to pass away, or they're going to simply become disinterested and go away. All right, so we've got some things we've got to overcome about finding the right people. We've got to let go of the thought that they're all going to care about our organization. Everybody should. How do we find the right people, and who are the right people? Well, here's something that I want you to think through, and that is an ideal donor prospect. Everybody has an ideal donor, and if we can really narrow in who that person is, we can go find them easily and in large numbers. And doesn't that sound good? I first learned this probably in the early 2000s, and it made so much sense to me. And I want to share this with you. And actually, if you have the handouts from your GoToWebinar dashboard, there's an extra page in the back that I added just for you because I knew you'd want this. It's on page 3. It's an ideal donor profile worksheet. It's going to help you think through exactly who you're looking for. In order to create an ideal donor profile, you're going to think about the ideal person who gives to your organization now. Here's a very easy way to do it. Think about your top 5 or 10 donors. And if you don't know them all, think about what you do know about them. And then think about what they have in common. And here's some of the things that we're looking for. Are they all men or women? Or maybe there's a mix. It doesn't really go one way or the other. Is there an age range? Do they tend to be in their 50s and 60s? Are they in their 30s and 40s? Or is it all across the board? We're looking for trends. We're looking for commonalities. What do they value? What do they do for fun? Do they have family? Do they value their family? Where do they spend their time? Where do they spend their money? And what else? Now, you may not be able to answer very many of those. The first time that I did this, I certainly couldn't. I went on what I knew about my top donors, which was I knew they were female. I knew that they were older. I was pretty sure that they attended church services every week. I didn't know for sure about all of them, but the ones that I did know, I was pretty sure. I knew that they were active in the community. They were volunteering and doing some other things. So this was when I was at the food bank. What do you imagine that I could do with that information? If I just looked at my top donors and said, wow, they're all women. I'm pretty sure they're attending church services. They're volunteering in the community. Where can I go find them somewhere? What I came up with was, what if I go and speak to women's groups at churches? I wonder if I would find more people just like this. So I did, and it worked. It was amazing. Of course, I put together a really good presentation, and I had a way to encourage people to sign up to hear more. I didn't ask them to join my newsletter list. I said, sign up to hear more about how we're changing lives. People were interested in that. Nobody wants to sign up for your newsletter list, but they do want to hear more about what you're doing to change lives. And I would walk out of every speaking gig with names, donations, and invitations for more speaking gigs. It was very cool. And it was just this simple little thing. So if you want to, you can even like gel this down to 3 things. What do they like? What do they value? And what are they interested in? And just see what you can find in common. Again, if you use this handout on page 3, it's pretty detailed. You may or may not come up with answers on all of those. You could survey your donors if you wanted to and ask them a few questions. I wouldn't ask too many because people won't answer too terribly many. But that gives you a place to start. So someone's asking about the handouts. If you grab the one on the GoToWebinar dashboard, it actually has a couple extra pages in it than the one that I emailed out earlier today. After I started looking at this, I thought I really want you to have that donor profile worksheet. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy that. So look over on the right of the screen on the GoToWebinar dashboard, and there should be a place that says handouts. And you can download it right from there. All right, so is this making sense to you? Type in the chat box and let me know. Does this make sense to you that you could probably figure out a profile for your ideal donor and identify them in terms of demographics and psychographics? Does that make sense to you? Beth is saying the link for the handouts is just above the question box. Thank you. All right, Sarah's asking a good question. Yes, this makes sense, but what if it leaves out other groups that we haven't reached out to yet or reached out to well? That is perfectly okay. Perfectly okay. You know, one of the things that happened to me at the food bank is when I looked at just flat people who were given the biggest amounts of money, that's where I found that we were looking at these women. When I looked at some other groups, like we had an event that was a motorcycle run, and I'm going to tell you that's a real different demographic. But for that event, that was the demographic that we were looking for. And you may have a couple of different demographics. You may have a couple of different ideal donor profiles, and that's okay. You know, maybe you realize you've got one that's these older women. Maybe you've got another one that's like couples who are 45 to 55. It's okay. It's all right. All right, so Beth is saying, what if your ideal donors aren't in groups? Look for the commonality. There's probably something. There's probably something that they all have in common. It might be that they all live in a certain county or in a certain community. It might be that they're all reading the local newspaper. You're just looking for patterns, because when you can find those patterns, then you can ask yourself, how do I use this to go find these people more easily in the community? And that's what we're looking for here. Because when you can do, like I did that one time when I was able to go speak to women's groups, and there were 20 or 30 or 40 women in that group, that was like getting in front of 20 or 30 or 40 ideal donor prospects all at once. And if I did a good job of telling the story, it was very easy to encourage them to sort of join our family. It was very cool. Jennifer is exactly right. Jennifer's saying, yes, this makes sense. She's seeing some patterns that they had assumed, but now she has the data to prove it. Awesome. The question is, what inspires them to give to us? We need to ask them. Yes, that's coming up. I'm going to talk to you about how to inspire donors, because I think that's really important. All right. Awesome. This is really important. If you can wrap your head around this ideal donor profile concept, you can really get creative about where to go find people. Instead of just approaching everybody, you can get in front of groups of people who are most likely to care about what you're doing and to say yes. This is actually one of my favorite exercises to do with clients. Okay, let me see here. Where am I? Besides right here. All right, so the big question then, once you figure out your profile, is where do you find these people easily and in large numbers? So this is homework. If you haven't done this already, go back and do this. Number 1, create your ideal donor profile. Number 2, make a list. See if you can come up with at least 3 places where you can go find people easily and in large numbers. Just brainstorm it out, see what you can come up with, and then you can figure out the best way to go approach these people. And I'm going to give you some more insight into that in just a moment. Let me just check real quick on Q&A. So a couple more questions. I'll tell you what, I'm going to hang off on those questions until I get to another part because I think I may be able to answer them in just a minute. Okay, we have this 3-part formula for success: right people, right time, right message. That's the right people. It's not necessarily about approaching the rich people in town. It's not necessarily about people in a specific zip code. It's about targeting in on who your ideal donors are right now and going out and finding more people just like them. So it's a very like techie marketing kind of way to go about it, and it works. The next piece is about the right message. And this is one I really want you to pay attention to because I'd say chances are really good most of you are not doing this as well as you could. Some of you are probably doing it better than others, but let me give you some ideas here. The right message is about what you need to say to win the donors' hearts and open their wallet. It's not about you. So actually, let me go right to obstacles to messaging because the first one is being self-centered, and that's what most of us do. And I'm going to raise my hand. I was guilty of this when I was a development director. Here's my thought on this. When you live and breathe your organization every day, you know it inside out, upside down, backwards, forwards, and 6 ways to Sunday, right? You know a lot of detail. And your tendency is when you share information to tell everything you know because you want people to understand the depth of what you do and the extent of how you're helping people. And unfortunately, that is like trying to drink from a fire hose. It's a turnoff. It's very self-centered when all you say is we, us, us, us. It's like some kind of crazy fundraising French. Here's how you find it. You can go back and look at some of the things you've been sharing with people and see, do you say, we've been around for this many years, our programs cover this many counties, we, us, us, us. It's our anniversary. We're so excited about this award we won. Like that's all very self-centered language. So you got to put yourself in the donor's shoes and say, do I care about that? Does that work for me? Existence versus impact. This is another huge obstacle to messaging, and here's how this shows up. If you're asking people to give to your annual fund, that's asking them to fund your existence, and nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to give so that you can pay the stuff that's in your budget. What people want to give to is the work you're doing that's changing lives. They care about how you're making a difference. So it cracks me up every time I open the mail and there's an envelope in there that says 2016 annual fund enclosed. Man, I want to mark it up in red and send it back to the organization and go try again. I don't care about your annual fund. I don't. What I care about is what are you doing that's making a difference? Give me a story. Tell me how you're changing somebody's life. So we have to talk more about impact and less about, and actually none about our existence. Hopefully you're getting that. The other thing that's a huge obstacle is when you get jargon breath. Jargon is insider language, slang, technical terms, acronyms, and anything that's going to alienate a donor. Anything they don't understand can be jargon. So if you're talking to your donors about things like at-risk populations and continuum of care, that's jargon. The average person doesn't understand that. And you got to leave all that stuff out. Don't get that they understand that. Another thing that happens is if you're talking about your programs by name and you're assuming your donors understand what program you're talking about, you're making a huge mistake because they probably don't. They don't know your organization as well as you do. So you have to talk to them in language that they're going to get and they're going to understand. What you say to your donors either moves them to give or bores them to sleep or something in between. So you need to look at everything that you're sharing, whether it's in a newsletter, whether it's an annual report, a press release, a thank you letter, social media, anything you're sharing has got to be very donor focused and in language that they will understand and be able to respond to. So if you send them a page that's all full of acronyms and program names and slang and technical terms, they're going to read maybe 6 words and go, I'm done. What are we having for dinner? And they're on to the next thing. So really be careful about this. I see this stuff all the time. And I'll tell you what, as a donor, none of that inspires me to give. None of it. So let me give you a formula for inspirational messaging. Here's how this works. It's very simple. It's called Who, How, Story. Who, How, Story. We help who to how. Let me tell you about story. Okay, so here's how this works. Let me give you a habitat example. So we help families who are living in deplorable situations to earn a home of their own. Let me tell you about the Smith family. Chris and Robin came to us because they were living in an apartment that had a very serious mold issue, and their 3-year-old son was sick all the time because of the mold. They had talked to their landlord. Their landlord wasn't willing to do anything about it. They didn't have the funds to move into anything else, and they were very stuck. It was really sad. They joined the Habitat program and got started right away on their sweat equity, and it didn't take long before we were actually standing on the porch handing them the keys to their very own home. It's been 6 months. The little boy's health issues have cleared up. They are very proud that they can hang pictures on the walls in the home and not worry about putting nails in the walls. And they're very happy and proud and now members of the community in a much better, bigger way than they ever have been before. So you see, there's a way that you can message something that's not all about you. It's where you talk about who you help, how you change their life, and then go right to the story. You all know this. You all know that the story is the powerful thing. That's the thing you remember. And yet, most of the time, we have it backwards. We talk about we talk about our process, our program, how we do things, who we are, our credentials, where we're located, our hours of operation. We get into a lot more detail than our donors need to know. So we got to flip that around and get more into what inspires our donors, which is giving them the stories. Okay, Catherine has a great question. How do we make sure our sharing personal information through stories doesn't exploit the people we help? That's a very good question. And it's going to depend on your organization and also the size of your community, because if you're in a very small community, you got to be really careful what you share. The community that I live in is very small, and it's entirely possible that we could tell a particular story, and even if we change the name, some people are going to know exactly who we're talking about. So we have to really be careful to protect people. If there's not a particular story you can tell, for whatever reason, you can tell the story of the typical person. So this is something I used to do at the food bank. I would say, let me tell you about the typical person who shows up needing emergency food assistance. They're working 2 or 3 part-time jobs. They have barely a high school education, which means that really limits their earning potential. They're only able to work minimum wage, and nobody wants to hire them full-time, so they're working 2 or 3 part-time jobs. They're trying to cover rent, utilities, childcare, transportation, insurance, clothing, and food, and then if something happens, they can't make it work. Okay, so you see how we do that. It's very easy then to tell that typical story of somebody you're helping, and it's just as powerful. You can make it just as powerful. So for everybody, I want you to really start thinking about how you're sharing about your organization and about stuff. Stop sharing about programs and process. Start sharing about impact and outcomes. You can write that down if you need to. You can just write down no to program and process, yes to impact and outcome. Okay, what if you're not a social justice or improvement organization? Our story will not have personal impact like your examples. Okay, then you've got to find a way to make it inspirational to your donors. So this is for Beth. So Beth, one time I was teaching a class where we were talking about this, and I had somebody raise their hand, and this happens almost every time. Somebody raised their hand and goes, well, we're not like the food bank or Habitat. Ours is an environmental organization. We're trying to protect, it's like a park, this one little park. So we can't really talk about how we're changing lives. And I said, okay, then I think you're being a little short-sighted, because you need to evaluate your organization, even if it's land protection, animal welfare, it doesn't matter. It does still have an impact on lives. And you've got to find it. You have to find the sex appeal in your own organization. So in the case of the park, I said, well, who comes to the park? People? Yes. People are enjoying the park. Then what about the park is it that people love? What are they enjoying? that's where you're going to have to start telling those stories about how the park changes their life. Is it because it's beautiful and it inspires them? Is it because it's a quiet place and they can come rest and rejuice themselves? Find the sex appeal. It's there, I promise you. Okay. Let's see where to get to. Okay, so I'd love for you to try this out. If we were all in person, I would all have you like just test this out and see how it goes. It can feel a little uncomfortable at first, and the more you do this, the more you practice it, the easier it gets. By the way, this is a fabulous exercise to do with your board. A lot of times your board members, not a lot of times, probably most of the time, most of your board members probably are not comfortable talking about your organization because they've just not practiced it. They don't know what to say. And if you give them this kind of a formula and just like literally have them repeat who, how, story, about 5 times, they'll remember it. Who, how, story. That's all they have to remember. We help who to how. Let me tell you about story. So it's a very easy thing to remember. Jennifer's asking, what about the arts? Is it more inspiring to talk about working artists or people attending? I think you probably want to have both. You got to read your audience in that case. What are they more interested in? And you can even dig into why does it matter that the arts are here? It matters for the artist because it's self-expression. It matters to the people who are enjoying it because, and then put your reasons in there. You know, and that's a really good opportunity, if you haven't done this lately, is to survey some of your donors and ask them what they love most about the art that your organization is promoting. You know, if they're attending a performance, what do they get out of it? How do they feel when they leave? If they're coming to an art exhibit, same thing. What do they get out of it? How do they feel when they leave? And they'll tell you, you know, a lot of people who are patrons of the arts will tell you it expands how they feel, it relaxes them, makes them feel better, and so forth. All right, so all of you need to figure this out. What do people get from supporting your organization? What inspires them about your organization? And if you're not sure, you can certainly go ask. You can survey them. There's nothing wrong with that at all. All right, let me go on to the right time. Let's talk about this. So by the way, I'm hoping that you're all starting to think about messaging and that you need to go back and look at your newsletters, your social media, thank you letters. Look at all of that from the perspective of your donor and make sure that what you're sharing is inspiring and not boring them. Okay, let's talk about the right time. When is the right time to ask for a gift? So if you can see my slides, I have a happy couple on the beach. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you are married? Or maybe you know somebody who's married, or at least you're familiar with this concept of getting married. So we see our happy couple here. Clearly they have just gotten hitched. Do you think she showed up in that wedding gown on the first date? Probably not. That probably would have freaked him out and he would have run screaming to get away from her. She didn't show up on the first date in her wedding gown. And yet so many of us do that in fundraising. We show up way too early in the relationship with our hand out. We're looking for a donation. Yeah, when you think about it that way, it doesn't feel too good, does it? No. So we have to be really careful. Timing isn't necessarily about the time of year, although there are times of year that are better than others. You all know that. You all know that October, November, December is fundraising season. That's a great time to be asking. But what about right now? We're about to start the month of February. Is this a good time to ask? It can be. I've raised a lot of money in February in my career. It's really more about the timing of the relationship and where you are in developing that with a donor before asking. You really want to get to know them a little bit, and you really want to build some trust before you get too far into it. So let's look at obstacles to relationship timing. The first is desperation mode. When you are in a place where you're really short on your budget and you're desperate to raise some money, it stinks and donors can smell it. It's going to get in your way of making sure that the timing is right. You're going to ask too fast. You're gonna march way too fast in trying to ask for a gift. Another one is the ick factor. So this is about mindset. This is where sometimes people just feel really uncomfortable asking for a donation. Like, I can't ask them for money. I'll do anything else, but I'm not asking for money. Well, that's the ick factor. And that's going to get in your way of staying focused on the relationship and cultivating that donor in a way that works for them and works for you. In other words, when you're dealing with the ick factor, you're all looking at yourself and how you feel instead of thinking about the donor, the impact you're making, and the lives you're changing. So, if you can stay focused on lives that you're changing, it's so much easier to do some of this other stuff. It's so much easier to do fundraising in a way that works. Another thing that gets all in the way is when you're all focused on the money instead of the relationship, you'll skip the ABCs. Well, what the heck are the ABCs? Well, let me give you these. And they're actually on the handout about midway down the page. ABCs are about adding value. You have to add value to the relationship or people won't stay in it. I mean, think about for yourself. Have you ever been in a relationship with somebody and you start getting bored with that person or things start to really get on your nerves? It's like that there's not enough value in the relationship for you anymore, and those little things start to annoy you and they become more prominent than the things that used to be cute to you. So the value has shifted. So we have to add value to relationships with our donors. What does that look like? Well, you make them feel good. How do you make them feel good? Tell stories. Tell them how you're changing lives. That adds value. Build trust. Circle that one. That's the most important one. You have to build trust in order to expect people to give. People only give to organizations they know something about, they like, and they trust. It's called the know, like, and trust factor. If they know you and they like you and they trust you, they'll give. The C is about cultivating interest. It's your job to keep a donor interested. You can't assume that they're going to stay interested if they don't hear from you for 6 months. And I see this a lot. A lot of people are incredibly busy. I'm sure every single one of you are. You have a lot on your plate that needs to be done, and it's very easy to let stuff drop off or drop to the bottom of the priority list. And I see this happen with newsletters all the time. And yet a newsletter is a great tool, if you do it right, to add value, build trust, and cultivate interest. If the newsletter is all about you, is that going to work? If your newsletter is all, oh, we've got a new program and we're so excited, our case manager just got her blah, blah, blah certification. Like, that's all insider language. Donor doesn't care. That doesn't add value. Doesn't cultivate interest. Look at your newsletter and ask yourself, are we adding value in this newsletter? If I'm a donor, does this make me feel good? Does it build trust? Am I interested? It's your job to do that. Your job to keep them interested. So let me give you what I call the 3-to-1 ratio that I think will be really helpful, because one of the things that I see is that organizations are showing up with their hand out too much, and they become like that friend that nobody wants to talk to because they're always asking for something. You know that person. The only time that you hear from them is when they want something. Well, don't be that way with your organization. So what I want you to do is use this 3-to-1 ratio. I call it communicate, 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 ask. If you will communicate with them 3 times as often as you ask, you'll be fine. And if your communications, and that can be newsletters, that could be stories in the local news, on the media, that could be social media, it could be a lot of different things, thank you letters, annual reports, all kinds of things. If you'll communicate well and mind those ABCs, by the time you hit that 3rd communication, your donor is fine. They're ready to hear what's going on so that they can help you. You know, sometimes people say to me, how many times can we go to the well before the well runs dry? They're afraid of asking too many times during the year. And for those organizations, they're probably right to question it, because they're probably not communicating enough. They're probably simply asking, 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 which gets really old to a donor. You have to communicate some, and you got to do it in a really good way so that people are ready. All right, so we've got a couple of questions that I want to answer on this. Brooke wants to know, is there such a thing as waiting too long? We focus so much on relationships and creating organizational ambassadors. Yes, there is. There is such a thing. But you know what I find is if you think you might be going too long, you're probably just about right. So the minute that little nudge shows up in your brain that you may be waiting too long, it's probably time to ask. Yes, some people cultivate too long because they're afraid to ask. That's a whole different thing. That's a mindset issue. So if you do find yourself thinking, I think I'd rather just keep cultivating because I don't feel like I know enough, I don't feel I'm ready, I'm not confident, then those are excuses. And probably you're just trying to avoid asking. Magali says, thinking in a donor cultivation process, what time will be perfect time to start asking for donation without taking too long or too early? So part of that depends on a couple of things. One is it a new donor or is it somebody who's been around for a little while? Is it, because if they've already been receiving your newsletter for a little while, you've been doing some cultivation, right, wrong, or otherwise, no matter what your newsletter is about, you've been doing something with them. It also depends on how much you're going to ask. If you're going to ask for $10,000, that's a different amount of time that you need versus asking for $25. If you think about basically anything under $1,000, if you're doing the communicate ask, if you're sending a newsletter, if you're sending an e-newsletter once a month, if you're posting on social media, you can ask once every 3 or 4 months and you're going to be fine. That's fine. If you want to ask for 10,000, yeah, you probably better put a donor cultivation plan together because you're going to need to do that one-on-one, and that's real different. So there's really not a perfect amount of time. It depends on the donor. It depends on what you're asking for. It depends on how comfortable you are and how much you know about the donor. So now we get into the art of fundraising way more than the science. Paige is asking what exactly should be in a newsletter. I've talked about what not to include, what should be in it. So 2 things I want to say about that. One is don't put too much. Keep it easy to read. And number 2, as long as it is interesting or inspirational to your donor, it's good to go. I would start with a story every single time. If it's an e-newsletter, lead with a story. If it's print, that's what needs to be on the front page. I would ditch the letter from your executive director or your board chair. Nobody wants to read that anyway. It's all very predictable. If you've had some amazing thing happen lately where you were able to really help a lot of people, I would include something like that. Sometimes you can include statistics, like the food bank by the numbers, and I can include here's how many pounds of food that we were able to receive and distribute, and here's how many meals that equates to. That's an interesting number. Or maybe even how many volunteer hours were donated this month. Sometimes that's an interesting number. Like for Habitat, that's a way interesting number. You don't want to include too many of those, but just a couple of them. And if you can put it in an infographic, even better. And there's actually a couple of tools out there that are free for creating infographics. There's one that we used to use, and I'm trying to remember if it's called PictoChart or Pictograph. Let me type that in for you. PictoChart, I think is what that was called. PictoChart. You can probably go Google it. You can probably go Google free infographic tool, and you'll find it. That's a really handy thing to do. And by the way, I was able to create one, and I am not a graphic designer. Just saying. Okay. So really, the key here with successful fundraising is about knowing your donors, building trust. Because the truth is, people give to nonprofits they trust. If they don't trust you, they won't give. So really, everything you do needs to build trust. Look at it that way. You can put your newsletter together and then look at it and say, number 1, does this inspire me if I'm a donor? Number 2, does this build trust? Because everything you do needs to do those 2 things. People volunteer with nonprofits they trust. They recommend nonprofits they trust. So you need to be all about building the trust. Hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, so let's look at some practical pieces because I am all about the practical part. I love it when we can start talking about strategy. And, this is great. This is a little bit theoretical. How does this really show up? So I want to dig into some of this with you. So let's talk about strategy. The direct mail, the grants. How much of this should we be doing? How much of that should we be doing? I love this cartoon. If I had one word to describe our strategy, Yickelschnacker. Yeah, that's about how some of our strategies look like, right? So we gotta dig in a little bit on it. So a couple of things I want you to stay away from. I tell my clients this: stay away from nickel and dime activities. You know what I'm talking about. They're those things that you work really hard on and they barely generate any money at all. Things like, well, I have seen bake sales, car washes, spaghetti dinners. Now, for some of you, you might do those things and do really well. I've got a client that does a rummage sale every year, and they clear $10,000 on their rummage sale in a small community. And I say to them, that's awesome. Do it again. Keep going. For other people, they have activities that raise like $200. I sit on the board of a horse rescue group in my area, and we used to do the charity nights at Buffalo Wild Wings. I'd say most of you probably at least heard that's a restaurant chain, and they, like on a specific night, people can come in and eat dinner, and they can tell their server that they're there on behalf of the charity, and then the charity gets like 10%. So we were promoting, everybody go to Buffalo Wild Wings, and just like wearing it out, and then we would get like $150 or $200 out of it. And so when I heard about this, when I got on the board, I hit the brakes on that. I said, no, we're not doing that anymore. Because we can only go out to people so many times. People are only going to want to hear from us so many times. I don't want to use some of our times on things that bring us nickels and dimes. So we got to not do that. Sole source funding is another thing you got to watch out for. Sole source funding means you're getting most of your money from one thing, one grant, one event, one donor. That's real dangerous, because if that one event, one grant, one donor goes away, you got big problems. And then you also want to stay away from the same old thing, that status quo where you've been doing that one event for years and years and years, and it's probably time to let it go. Amy's got a good question. Amy says, what if it's a small business approaching you to do a nickel and dime thing? It depends on how much of your time it's going to take. So if you're in a really small community and you got a business that wants to do something for you, but you don't have to do anything, let them go. It's fine. Let them raise the money. If all you have to do is show up and receive the check and shake everybody's hand, that's fine. I call those third-party events where somebody else is doing all the work. When I was at the food bank, we had a golf tournament that was done by a local Sertoma club, and they did all the heavy lifting. We showed up to help with registration and all the other stuff during the day, and then we got like $15,000 out of it, which was fine. Not a problem at all. All right, so a couple more questions that have popped up, and I'm going to come back to those in just a minute. So as we think about strategy, I want you to think big. We want to be outrageously successful this year, which means we got to stay away from the nickel and dime, the sole source funding, same old thing. So let's look at 3 parts of the fundraising machine. Now, when you're laying out your plan, when you really start digging into the strategies and the tactics, there's 3 things I want you to think about. Not just how many dollars you need to raise, but a couple other things. By the way, be very specific. As you're laying out your fundraising plan, put a specific dollar amount down. If you think, well, we'll just go raise as much as we can and then we'll figure out how to spend it, that's a wrong answer. Because how do you know when you've got there? How do you know when you're successful? You don't know when to do the happy dance or have a party. It's also very tough to share with donors, because I promise you're going to have people that are going to want to know, how much do you need? They want a context for how their gift is going to make a difference, and you need to know. You need to know down to the penny how much you need to raise. In addition to that, and I'm guessing that most of you probably have that or close to it, you also need to look at how many donors do you need to renew. Remember earlier I mentioned donor retention numbers are in the toilet, so you need to be thinking about donor renewal. And you need to think about that in terms of the strategy. And I'm going to show you something in just a minute that I think will make a little more sense. And you need to think about how many new donors you need to bring on board. So back to my example from earlier, if donor retention right now is running about 35%, and you start the year with 100 donors, you're going to end the year with 35. That means you've got to bring in 65 new people just to break even, just to keep going, just to start the next year on the same platform. So it's really important that whatever you're doing during the year, that you're thinking about how you're renewing people and how you're acquiring new ones. So I want you to keep that in mind as we start looking at strategies and tactics. Now, one of the things people ask me all the time is, what's the right mix of events and grants and direct mail and all and major gifts and all that stuff? What's the right mix that we should have in our fundraising plan? So really it depends on your organization, but I'm going to start you off with the 1-10-1000 rule just to get you started. And I think it could be really helpful for those of you who've been doing too many events. All right, the 1-10-1000 rule goes like this. You're going to start with a signature event. You're going to do one event and you're going to do really well. You're going to make it signature, which means everybody in the community is going to associate it with your organization. So for example, in Knoxville, Tennessee, if you say Rubber Duck Race, people go, oh, Boys and Girls Club. They all associate that event with that organization. When you do 6 or 8 or 10 small events over the year, each one of those events is going to bring in a small amount of money, and it actually becomes very tiresome for the community, for your supporters, and for you. It's exhausting, for one thing. If you'll pour all your energy into one big event and make it as strong as it can be, get all your sponsors for that one event, you can have a great event, generate a lot of money, and then not be rushing off to do the next event. You'll actually have more time to focus on individual donors, which is really important. So do one event, do it really well, then go after 10 grants. Why 10 grants? Well, for one thing, it fits really nicely in the 1-10-1000 formula. Here's the real reason. I've done a lot of grant research and grant writing in my career, and here at Get Fully Funded, we actually do grant writing for people. We do a lot of grant research, and we can usually find 10 really good, hot grant leads for organizations. What I want you to get from this is don't leave grant money on the table. Go get all of it that you can. What that means is you need to go do some research, and there are plenty of tools out there that can help you. Do the research, find the opportunities, get them on a calendar, and then make sure that you're writing for those grants. So don't leave grant money on the table. It's too easy to go do the research. You can probably even get a volunteer to help you with that. I've had volunteers in the past who've helped me go find grant opportunities. One signature event, 10 grants, then I want you to build your donor base to 1,000 donors. I know I can hear some of you just had a heart failure. Trust me on this. If you only have a couple hundred donors, you need to be focused on growing it every year until you get there. If 1,000 seems really overwhelming to you, then all I want you to focus on is the next 10. Go get the next 10 new donors. And once you do that, go get the next 10. And once you do that, go get the next 10. And just keep going until you get to 1,000 donors, 1,000 active donors. You want 1,000 people who are giving throughout the year. Why this formula? Well, one of the things that I know, because I've done some research on this, of the 1.5 million nonprofits in this country, most of them have a budget that's less than $100,000. So I thought, okay, what's the right mix if your budget needs to be $100,000 to get there? Now, for those of you who have a budget that's bigger than this, you can just, multiply it by 2 or 5 or whatever it needs to be. But look at the math. If you have a signature event that you do well, and you get sponsors, and it's a fun event, and people come, you can make $25,000 off of it. If you get 10 grants at $2,500 each, that's another $25,000. If you have 1,000 people who each give you one $50 gift during the year, that's $50,000. And you add all that up, and it puts you at $100,000. Now, I think this is pretty fun to play with this math, to start to look at what's possible. If you need to adjust it, you can. Business sponsors, Amy, that's a good question. Non-event related, where does this fall in? Well, you might plug those into your 1,000 donors. If you have businesses that are sponsoring. Normally I put business sponsorships with events, but if you have something different, put it in your 1,000 donors. And you can play with this to make it work for you. If you have more grants than that or more grant money, plug that in. If your event does $50,000, plug that in. If you know that your donors are very loyal and they'll give twice a year, and you know that your average gift size is $35, plug that in. Play with the math, make it work for you, and this will help you try to figure out what's possible and where you should be going. Because if you don't have some idea of how you're trying to build your fundraising program, you're just going to take whatever happens to come along, and I'm here to tell you, you will not have outrageously successful fundraising if you take whatever happens to come along. It doesn't work that way. let me show you one more thing. Here's where you're going to start working this out with, and I've put this on your handout on page 2, so you'll have this. With your special event, I want you to think about how much money are you going to raise, how many new donors are you going to acquire, how many donors are you going to renew with that special event. With your grants, is that going to be all renewed foundations, or is it going to be some new ones? With your 1,000 donors, is there going to be some new ones in there? Are you renewing people? How much money you're going to raise? If you start to really take this all into consideration, then you can plan out which activities you're going to use this year, you're going to plan for, that are specifically going to be for renewal. Which activities are going to specifically be for generating new donors? And you can plan that out and make sure that your numbers work for you. One of the things that I do is I help people figure this out, and it's not always easy, and there's some guesstimates involved, but at least they have an idea of where they're going and what things they absolutely have to do so that they're bringing new donors in. Magali asking, is it a good idea to have monthly donors? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if you have people who are giving every month, that's a pretty serious commitment. And typically, those people who are giving every month wind up being great planned giving donors. So yes, if you have a monthly giving program going, I would fan the flames on that and make it work. Jeanette wants to know, is it realistic for organizations in small communities to get to 1,000 donors? I think if you don't have 1,000 people in your community, then that may not be possible. I want you to shoot for that. I think about the community that I live in. We literally have 5,000 people in this town. Is it possible to get to 1,000? Yes, we did it. I worked with our local Habitat for Humanity, and we built our donor base to about 1,200 out of 5,000. How did we do it? We got really clear about who we were looking for. We got clear about where exactly to find them. We got really clear about exactly what we needed to say, and it worked. It absolutely worked. All right, let's see. That's a great question, though. Let's see where I need to go to now. So, what do you need to do next? What do you need to do next with this? Well, the next thing that I would want you to do is to set some very specific goals, not just for how much money you want to raise, but also for donor renewal. If you know, because I already told you that donor renewal runs about 35% donor retention, do you want to shoot for 35%? Maybe you want to go back and measure yours and see what it looks like. Maybe you want to shoot for 40 or 50%. Set a goal. It's really hard to meet a goal if you don't have a goal. Also look at a goal for how many new donors you want to bring in. If you have 200 active donors right now, I would challenge you to double that in the next year. Go for it. If you don't hit 200 but you get 175, that's still pretty good. That's 175 new people you have who are supporting what you're doing. Put everything into a written plan. Decide if you're going to use the 110-1,000 rule. Decide on that. Get going toward it. I do want to share with you another thing that I put in the handouts that are on the GoToWebinar dashboard. It's on page 4, is what I call a summary calendar template. This is a very simple one-page fundraising plan that if you don't have anything else, this will change your world. It's a way for you to think about what you're going to do across the year in a lot of different categories like grants and special events, individual donors, whether it's recruiting monthly givers, working on direct appeal, whether that's email or through the regular mail, or individual asks. There's a whole column there just for major gifts. You've got a place to think about what you're going to do in terms of marketing, so reaching out to the community, doing public speaking, being in the news, and so forth. Communications, think about that as internally, communicating with your donor family, with your supporters, in terms of newsletters, website, annual report, and so forth. And then also get on there anything that falls into the other category, like vacations, trainings, and conferences. It'll let you see at a glance what's coming up for the year, which is really helpful. If you're right now finding yourself up against the wall pretty regularly, this can change your world. This is also really helpful if you have a board member who pops up and goes, oh my gosh, I have a great idea. Here's what we need to do. I just saw a fill-in-the-blank organization down the road. They're doing a golf tournament. It went really well. We need to do that too. And you can pull this out and show it to them and go, that is a really great idea. But let me show you what we already have planned for the year. And in order to do that golf tournament, we have to take something off of this plan. So do you want to help me maybe try to prioritize that? 9 times out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, that board member will back right off because they don't want to try to tell you how to do your job. By the way, it's also really helpful if you put this together, then you can share it with your board and then ask them where they would like to plug in and help. It helps you to get buy-in. And then next thing, once you get all this on paper and in writing, is get busy. Get started. I mean, yes, we're just about to the end of January, but you know what? It's okay. It's never too late to start a plan. It's always okay to jump in and get something going. All right, let me back up and answer a few questions. You guys have been really good about asking things. Magali's asking, how do you engage people to donate monthly? Well, the same way that you ask them to donate anytime, you give them a good enough reason. You inspire them. I remember when I started the monthly giving program at the food bank, it was kind of funny. I had a donor who called and she said, hey, we just moved here from Ohio and we were giving monthly to the food bank there, and I just wondered if you had a monthly giving program. And I kind of swallowed. I'm like, well, I guess we're about to. All I could think of to do was to send her 12 reply envelopes. And I literally wrote the month on each one, and I mailed them to her. And then I thought, wonder if I've got anybody else who's already giving monthly. And I went and looked, and sure enough, there were. So I just started putting some structure around it. And when it came to inspiring people, I went back and looked at our numbers. If you've never done this exercise, this is a really fun one. Look at your unit of service, whatever your unit of service is for your organization. For a food bank, it's a pound of food. For an animal rescue organization or a homeless shelter, it might be one night of services. For some of the rest of you, you're going to have to figure out what your unit of service is. And then you look at your total expenses for the year, your total units of service that you delivered, and divide it out so that you can figure out what it cost you to deliver a unit of service. Well, at the food bank, we knew how much food we had to handle to equate to a pound or to equate to a meal. So I knew basically, you'll get this because I did the math, 27 cents is all it cost us to handle enough food to feed somebody. 27 cents a meal. So I said, well, let's see, 27 cents times 3, it's 81 cents a day to feed somebody. And we drew up this little flyer, and I had this terrific picture of this little boy in overalls. He's kind of dirty looking. And I said, for 81 cents a day, you can make sure that he gets to eat. And that was all I needed. And I signed up people like crazy into that monthly giving program. That's what you call turning outcomes into income. When you can look at what you're doing that's making a difference, figure out what it costs you to make a difference, and then find a way to language it or message it so that it's inspirational, that's when you'll start raising more money. And it does take some practice. I was not good at that at first. One of the things that I found for myself is I was very curious about the numbers. I would say, wonder how many of this we did, wonder how many of that we did. And I was just very curious, and I would crunch the numbers. And sometimes I would go to our finance guy and I would say, hey, I'm thinking about this and I calculated this. Does this seem right to you? And I'd get somebody else's input on it. And sometimes he would have some thoughts about different ways to calculate it. It was fascinating, and it worked. So definitely, if you don't have monthly giving, you may want to try that. Heather has a couple of different youth programs that fall under her auspices. Does she calendar for the organization or for each individual program that needs funding? You might try it both ways and see which way you like better, because there might be pros and cons to each way. I think it's easier if you have everything on one calendar personally, because then you're going to be less likely to miss something or forget something or overlook it. So try it and see what you like, but definitely I think if it were me, I'd try to find a way to put it on one calendar. What you might be able to do, Heather, is add a couple more columns to this. If you've got something very specific for that program, then you might add a column just for the program and put those very specific things on there. Catherine, should we spend money on an audit to be able to show donors or granting agencies that our books are clean. If so, what do we look for in an audit service? Yes. So when your organization gets big enough, you absolutely want to have an independent audit. That's where like an accountant comes in to look at all your books. You're going to find that for some grants, you have to have it. They want an audit. You're going to find some donors that are savvy enough that they want it. So I would say as soon as you can do that, do that. All right, tell you what, let me come back here and finish this up, and then we'll just spend the rest of the time on Q&A. You guys have got great, you got great questions, so I do want to answer as many of those as we can. Here's one thing that I want you to do, and you'll find it at the bottom of page 2. And I want you to think about what's one thing that you can do in this coming week, so next week, to start making this year outrageously successful. What's one thing that you can do in the coming week to start making 2016 outrageously successful? Write it on your handout. Maybe it's just to go back and look at your donor retention number. Maybe it's to figure out your ideal donor profile. Maybe you want to start on the summary calendar template, or maybe there's something else. Whatever it is, write it down and then put it on your calendar for next week so that you actually get started. One of the things that I have found over time is it's very easy to attend trainings or go to conferences and you learn a lot, but if you don't pick something and start with it, you'll never take action on what you just learned. And I think that if you can just pick one thing and put it on there, that's going to be really super awesome. And if you are willing to type it in, I would love to hear the one thing that you're going to do next week to get this year kicked off. And while you're doing that, I'll have a sip of water and then I'll be right back. We'll answer some questions. All right, let me back up and look at some of the other questions from earlier, and let's make sure everything got answered. You guys have been great today, by the way. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you for asking questions and playing with me. It makes my job a lot easier, so thank you. Okay, let me see. I know there was a couple of things earlier. I'm scrolling. Okay, Amy had a question earlier about the best way to initiate personal conversations, not in a group, in a personal way. If you're talking about approaching your donors or people who are already giving, one of the things that I would do is call them just to thank them. That is such a non-threatening, easy thing to do, just to initiate conversation. Just call them and thank them for their past support. You can maybe ask them one other question or so. It's just a really easy, low-pressure way to get started with a conversation, one-on-one. Okay, I know there was another one. Hang on. Jennifer was asking, should you ask for specific amounts or just a donation? I would always ask for a specific amount, because here's the thing, Jennifer. Let's say I'm your donor and I'm capable of making a pretty good size gift, but you don't know exactly how much, and you ask me to donate and you don't ask for a specific amount. As your donor, I don't have any idea how much you need. Are you asking me for $5 or 5,000 or something in between? So the more you can be specific with me, the easier it is for me to support you in a way that's going to be really meaningful for you. Amy's asking lots of good questions today. Amy says, how do we follow up with annual donors who have given consistently but didn't give this year without being pushy? Start with a phone call. Because if they've consistently given in the last several years but not this year, something might have happened. They may have a very serious illness. They may have been in a car accident. There may be something going on. And so one of the easiest things to do is to pick up the phone and call them just to thank them for their past support. Because usually what happens is once you get somebody on the phone and they realize you're not about to ask them for money, they'll start telling you things. They may say, oh, we love your organization and I am so sorry we've not been able to give this year, but my husband just lost his job and we're trying to help with our niece who just had a baby, blah, blah, blah. There may be a long story behind it. Just call them. Call them to thank them. They'll appreciate that. Jennifer was asking, should a donor be given a choice of donation amounts or a set amount? Well, it depends. If you're doing a direct mail piece, I would give them 3 or 4 options. I wouldn't give them any more than that. You know, on a reply card, you usually see a box for like $35, $25, $35, $50, and then an other. On a direct mail, you absolutely want to give people options. If you're asking in person, if you're doing a major gift ask, I would ask for a specific amount. I'll go right to an amount. And that can be really tricky to determine, and it's going to depend on what you know about that donor, what they've given to your organization, what you know about what they've given to other organizations, what you know about their situation. You do as much research as you can, and then at some point you give it your best shot, and you go for it. All right, Margaret. Hi, Margaret. Margaret says the hot topic in fundraising these days seems to be crowdfunding. Is that a worthwhile bandwagon to jump into? I love that you asked that question. So, you know, it kind of reminds me of, I guess you guys might have had this too. When I was little, my mom was going, if everybody else jumps off a cliff, are you going to jump too? You have to be really careful about things that everybody else seems to be into. If it's hot and you can see a practical application and you can see how it might work for you, do it. If you're not sure, if you have your hands very full with everything else, I don't know that I'd jump onto it. Here's what I think about crowdfunding. It's basically leveraging the power of relationships using an online tool. It is not a post it and they will come activity, which a lot of people think it is. A lot of people think, oh, if we just go to GoFundMe and we'll post something about our program and people will come from everywhere and they'll give to us. It doesn't work that way. You're still going to have to drive traffic. You're going to have to get people to encourage their friends to go, and you've still got to have a good reason and inspiration for people to give. I've seen it work. I've seen it flop. So I really think it depends on if you have the right strategy for it and if you have the right amount of energy and time set aside to put into it, then it can work and be very successful. Okay, some of you are starting to tell me what you're going to work on this week. I love it. Dawn's going to be creating her inspirational donor grabbing story. Yay! Carrie's going to present the 110-1000 rule to the board. Yay! I'd love to know how that goes. Jennifer, yay! And we have multiple Jennifers on here. So this Jennifer says she's a new board member and she needs to learn her numbers, the number of donors, the money goal, and so forth, so she can be better informed. Yes, amen. Good for you, Jennifer. You're an inspiration. Another Jennifer is going to go apply for 10 grants. Yay. Catherine's going to ask for information that helps identify the common thread among top donors. That's perfect. Amy is going to be looking at retention numbers, connect with lapsed donors, excuse me, about how their early 2016 donation can make a difference. Yes, yes. And don't even say early 16, just say, here's how you can change lives right now. Right now. Magali says, wants to know if you're going to have access to the audio. Yes, you will. As soon as we get finished, actually sometime, probably take me about a half hour or so, I'm going to take the recording of this whole thing and I'm going to upload it and send you an email with the link and also a link for an evaluation. Nonprofit Pathways would love to know your experience with this webinar, what you got out of it, what you liked, to help them in planning future ones. So I'm going to send you a link to an evaluation. So we'd love for you all to fill that out. Ruth's going to have key people in her organization watch this webinar recording so they can understand why she's so excited about identifying our current donors and volunteers. Yay, I love that. That's great, Ruth, because if they hear the same thing that you just did, it's going to be easier to have conversations to move things forward. Rebecca's asking, hey, Rebecca. Rebecca's asking a reasonable rate for an audit. Past financial records show that it's cost as low as $1,500 in years past, yet this year the auditor wanted to charge $6,000. I'm not surprised. I would imagine, just depending on your community, you might pay anywhere from $3 to $6, $3 to $7, something like that. The last one I heard around here was $5,000. Check around. It's really important to get, if you can get somebody who has done a nonprofit audit before, that's going to be really helpful because they're not going to be learning on you. I prefer experience. And they may have a special rate. Just see what you can find. Another Jennifer says she's got to get over the ick factor. I admire you. You have my respect. Number one, because you recognize you've got some ick factor, and number two, you're going to try to work on it. That's perfect. I love that. Rebecca, what's step one in connecting to corporate donors? I don't want to cold call local businesses. It feels authentic. Yes, and it won't work. Cold calling does not work. So step one is to identify the businesses or the corporations you want to go after. Step two is to find a connection. You need to know somebody. You need one of your board members to know somebody. You need one of your volunteers to know somebody, because that relationship that's going to be the magic. That's going to be the key that's going to open up the door. Another Jennifer. Well, this is a day for Jennifers. There's like 5 or 6 different Jennifers on today. This Jennifer's going to work on, that's funny you just said that. This one's going to work on our stories that inspire. We have our big event. That's our major donor machine. Awesome. So we'll poll those donors and see why they give and what inspires them. That's perfect. Perfect. And I'll tell you a quick story as we move toward wrapping up. I remember one of the top donors that I had at the food bank. She was an older lady named Emily. And I remember when I was doing a lot of different fundraising, and I got to the point where I knew it was time to start working on major gifts, and I needed to go out and get face-to-face with her. So I invited her to lunch, and I was very nervous about it, by the way. But I asked Miss Emily what she thought the best thing about the food bank was. Like, what inspires you about the food bank? And I'm expecting her to say that her parents, were alive during the Depression, or she just thinks that this is really important to feed people. And what she said to me was, I love that it's so environmentally friendly. And I went, what? She said, well, you're taking all that food that otherwise would go in the trash and you're feeding people with it. You're keeping tons, literally tons of food out of the trash. And I'm going like, blink, blink. Okay. Well, that's a new take on it. What she taught me that day is do not assume that I know why anybody gives, because I don't. And on the way back, I'm driving back to the office going, wonder if I could qualify for some environmental impact grants. It was fun. She taught me a lot that day. All right, let me check on the official time here, because I'm going to make sure that I really honor your time. We got just a couple minutes left, so let me tell you about something extra I'm going to do for you. I'm actually going to do a bonus Q&A call for you all. I want you to go try to implement some of this stuff, see where you get to, and then in about a month, we're going to do a Q&A call where you're going to have another chance to hop on and ask me questions. Yeah? Awesome. I wanted you to have the opportunity to just try out some of this, because I know for some of you this is some new concepts, and I thought it'd be really fun just to get back together so that you can get some additional support, ask questions, pick my brain about things. I'm happy to do that. So right now we're set for Friday, February 26th at 1 p.m. and I'm going to send you a link for that. So watch your email for that. And watch your email later. I'm going to send you a link to the recording and also an evaluation. And Nonprofit Pathways would really like for you to fill out that evaluation. It's going to be really helpful for them. So please, please, please do that. Rebecca has one final question, and we have 1 minute left, so I'll answer it. Can you recommend an affordable donor management program for a small nonprofit? Kind of depends on what you think is affordable, but I'll tell you what I would recommend. There is, let's see, there is a website called Idealware, IDEALWARE.org, idealware.org, and you can find there a list of a lot of different programs, and you can see their features, their capabilities, and the costs. So I'd recommend you go look at that and then go just try a couple of them out, test drive them, and see what you like. All right, with that, we are at 2:30. I want to thank you all for being here. Jennifer is saying, one of the Jennifers, saying also really good prices on TechSoup, TECHSOUP, TechSoup.org, so go check that one out. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate that you've been asking questions. You guys have been a fabulous, fabulous group. Go raise a lot of money, and I will see you back for the Q&A call in about a month. Have a great day. Bye, everybody. Yay. So that must have went fairly smoothly then. Good.